Thank everyone for taking the time to be on the call today. We know here that your time is extremely valuable. So as always, my goal on today's webinar is to provide you with information that will help you increase your sales and hopefully improve your business's bottom line. Today we're going to focus primarily on building your expertise on the mechanics of indexed universal life contracts, hopefully to provide you with the knowledge and confidence that you need to win the trust of your clients. However, these mechanics should not be the focus of your first client meeting. This is something rather that you should use to answer your client's questions after you've already gone over the concept with them, and then at the same time also to assure yourself that you're putting your clients in the best long-term situation that you can. I'm regularly approached by agents with really one of two scenarios regarding IUL products. One, you think that it may be a fit for your client, but you're unsure of the details. And number two, another agent showed it to your client who then asked your opinion of it. This one is very common, so at this point you already know you're in competition. So scenario number two, I find, almost invariably centers around what I'm referring to today as the illustration games. So today I'm hoping to show you how you can win this game every time by unlocking the secrets of IUL products. So let's get into it. First of all, how do we unlock these IUL products and make them part of your regular toolbox that you're comfortable showing? I think there's basically two main keys to getting comfortable. One, you need to understand the need for these products and the benefits that they provide for your clients. The question here would be, why does this client need IUL? Now, this topic, this main point is something that we cover in several webinars. This would be sales concepts such as possibly the smart money concept, or using indexed universal life as a retirement supplement, or maybe just talking about all the tax advantages that the products have. Today we're going to focus really more on the second key, which is understanding the products. How do they work? The question here would be, what's the best product for this client of mine? So in order to do this, I think that we need to delve a little farther in to how the products work. And I'm not going to be talking about any one specific product here, rather how what the main things you need to understand are in order to compare products so that you become an expert. So you need to learn how to compare these products, and to do that we're going to put what I consider the main differentiating features in indexed universal life under the microscope to discuss in detail how you can understand them and what you need to know. So what are those? The first one, and by far the biggest one and the most misunderstood, is the illustrated rate. How do you determine what illustration rate you're going to show on an index product? Right? You can show all kinds of different rates. Not only what rate do you show on one product, you may get comfortable with the product and say, you know what, I run this product at 6.5% every time. The company told me it was okay, and so that's what I'm going to go with. Well, how about when you get in competition? Then you really need to understand how to compare products, and so you need to know what illustration rate is good for one versus another based on your assumptions. We'll spend a good bit of time on that. The second one is loan provisions. Now, loan provisions are extremely important with indexed universal life products because it's a cash accumulation focused product, and so down the road, after you've built cash, your client needs a good way to get it out of the contract, and the loan provisions can make a big difference between contracts, so you need to understand them. Number three is what I'll call bonus features. This is not going to be your main sales point usually, but these are small, usually riders or sometimes automatically included features that can make a big difference for your client and maybe just give that product that you're showing an extra little boost. Just makes it a little bit better than the next product. Number four, expense charges. We won't spend much time on this, and I don't expect you to spend much time on this with your clients. In fact, a lot of times you probably won't get into this. Where I see you possibly getting into this is in situations, which frequently happens, right, where you're in competition with another agent, and maybe it gets you get a little bit in depth with it. The other agent's showing expense charge and say, look, this product's got a low premium load, or you know, the cost of insurance is lower on this, or this and that. And at the very least, you need to understand what those different things mean so that you can explain it to your client. And finally, the cap history. As we know, the cap on index universal life products can change. And so we want to look at a company's history and say, hey, are they treating their current in-force block of products, are they treating those clients good, or are they just showing us introductory rates? Okay, so you want to have a good history. Those are the main 5 things you need to understand. So let's go into each one of them. First, the illustrated rate. And like I said, we'll spend the most time on this one. The question here is, how do you determine what rate to show your clients? This is the difficult question. And let me tell you how carriers have approached it thus far, and I don't think it's very good. It's just way too simplified. So this is actually from an illustration, a little snippet, and they're looking at one of their indexed accounts, the popular S&P 500 point-to-point. And what they're doing, and what most companies do, is they say, well, let's look at a 25 to 30-year period. Let's assume that during that entire time, our cap and floor and everything is exactly the same, that we don't make any changes. Now, that may be a stretch, and that is a stretch, but that's the best they can do there, I guess. And then here's where you're going to see the problem. Look at what they've done here. They look at what a client would have earned from one date to another date. Okay? So this was one scenario out of millions and millions of scenarios that could happen. Is that really a good rate to show to your client? Well, that's what companies have used to come up with their maximum illustrated rate. Now, some companies have gone into a lot more detail and averaged out a lot more stuff, and that's a step in the right direction. But just know that this rate probably in reality doesn't mean much. Okay? Now, you may have heard that the NAIC is coming out with new regulations for index universal life products, mainly for the illustrated rate that can be shown and also for some loan provisions. We'll go over both. But they're addressing this very problem. These illustrated rate rules are coming out in September. They're supposed to. And the first thing they're going to do is they're going to say all carriers have to use the same backtesting methodology. That makes perfect sense. And they're also going to require a lot more data points to make it more accurate. That's great. That one makes a lot of sense. This one we'll have to delve into a lot more. Number 2, the max IUL rate a company can show will be 145% of net general account investment earnings. Okay? And you're like, what does that mean? And how does that affect these products? Well, we need to understand how companies come up with their cap rate a little bit before we understand why this rule has come out. I think this is a great rule, and it makes a lot of sense based on how the products work. We have to understand how we get from current assumption to index products. Basically, index products are very close to your traditional current assumption UL, except with a twist. They have the options in there. The company buys options. So here's how it works. The carrier accepts premiums from your client. They invest it in their general account, which is mostly long-term high-grade bonds. Okay, right there, that's a current assumption UL, right? And then here's how index UL is different. The carrier then uses their general account earnings as their options budget. And they call an investment banker, obviously a simplified example here, and they say, what sort of option spread can we get based on this, in the S&P 500 or whatever, what can we get based on this budget? And they're going to say, well, based on that, we can give you a 0% floor and a, let's say, 12% cap. And there you go. So my conclusion on all of this is that caps, floors, and participation rates are tied to the carrier's general account earnings. And so a reasonable illustrated rate should also be tied to the general account earnings. And what is that general account earning? It's long-term bonds. Most carriers are around 5%. Okay? So should we show 5% for index UL? Not necessarily. The NAIC is saying we can show up to 145% of whatever that is. So if they had 5%, it'd be a max illustrated rate of 7.25. Okay, well, does that make sense? I think it does, because we have a risk spectrum, a risk-return spectrum, right? So the more risk you take, theoretically, the more return you should expect, right? UL is down here, basically a bond return. VUL and equities being in the market is up here, more risk, more return. Index UL should be somewhere in between because, right, you're going to get years where you get 0. No negative returns, but you're going to get 0, whereas with a regular UL, you probably would have gotten 4 or something like that. But you're also going to have years where you get higher returns. You're taking a little bit more risk, so you should expect a return somewhere between current assumption UL and somewhere between variable products. So that's how that works. So based on that, now that we understand the basic framework, let's look at the pieces we need to understand. The cap, the floor, the participation rate. This is a big feature, probably the biggest one for determining what illustrated rate you're going to show. Now, we're all familiar with that, so I'm not going to go into it. The type of indexed account, you may not have thought of this, but the type of indexed account you're in makes a difference, probably, what illustrated rate you should show. Most of the time, the most popular far and away is the S&P 500 point-to-point. And that has a certain risk profile, right, because of the S&P 500. Now, what if you were in another account, let's say this index account E over here, that was blended between all these different accounts? And you're looking at it and you're saying, well, that looks nice, that's diversification, that's good. And wow, look at that 17% growth cap. This is way better than these other options. Why are we not showing this to everybody? Well, if you look a little deeper at it, you'll notice that a large part of the mix here is very conservative investments. So this might make a lot of sense for a conservative client. However, should you really expect that you're going to be hitting that 17% cap consistently, and so this is going to earn more? No, because look at how much you've got in this bond index, and bonds are going to have a lower return. So overall, you have a more diversified, lower risk profile, and so this 17% cap is probably not costing the company any more than the 13% cap, so you really should not expect over time a higher return. The third piece here is market return assumptions. So this is, what do you think whatever index you're in is going to return? Do you think the S&P 500 is going to average 9%, 9.5%? Well, if you think that, you'd be correct, because historically, you'd be correct because that's what it has done over 20 and 30-year periods of time. So you can discuss this with your client, or you can just use it behind the scenes to determine the rate you're going to show. And I'm going to tie all this together for you real quick. The fourth piece here is IULtranslate.com. Any of you can type this in. There's no password required. This is a tool put out by John Hancock, and it really ties all these pieces together and gives you a rate to use. It's very precise. Here's what it looks like when you go there. And so here's that hypothetical long-term equity return. What do you think the S&P 500 is going to return? Let's say 9%. You put that in. What participation rate do you have? 100%? Your floor, put in here. Put in your cap here. Let's say 13.5%. Here's your translated assumption, 6.8%. Okay? Now, this is a great tool because you've got all these things you can put together, and it gives you a way to compare products. So now we can take that product with a 13.5% cap, say it's going to return reasonably 6.8%. You can compare it to a product with a 11.5% cap that might, in this assumption, only return 5.8 or whatever it is. So then you can take that 11.5% cap product, learn it at 5.8, take the 13.5% product, learn it at 6.8, and say, based on how these products work, this is a reasonable way to compare them. If you were just to show the same interest rate for those products, the product with the lower cap would have an obvious advantage because it costs the company less to have that lower cap. So their expenses may be less, and the product might look better, but in reality, it has a much lower chance of giving the client that return. That is what's so useful about this tool. Now, if you are very technical, you can go into this marketing library button down here, and you can get a very technical explanation from John Hancock as to how they went about making this calculator. And I'll tell you, it's very in-depth. It should answer any questions you would have, and probably a lot of questions you never would have. And also, there's a client presentation. If you want to show your client what you did, great. There's a client-approved presentation you can show them. Very useful. Okay, so now we have an idea of how we come up with our illustrated rate. Let's look real quick at expense charges. I wanted to just cover the main ones and then just look at a snippet from an illustration. Okay, so typically products are going to have a premium load. A lot of times this is somewhere from 5 to 7%. This is just you pay a premium of X and they immediately take a certain percentage of it off the top. A higher premium load obviously makes your early returns in the product look not so good. That's why you oftentimes have an account value that's lower than what you've put in initially. This is to recover sales charges, obviously things like commissions and underwriting fees, all that kind of stuff. Cost of insurance you're all familiar with. That's the cost of actually, the mortality risk the company's taking. What I like to call other expenses, this is going to be things like administrative things, what did it cost to send out mail on these products? This is a low percentage, typically very low. And then there's surrender charges, which you're all familiar with. What I would recommend is that you get a supplementary report on your illustrations, the expense report. And all illustrations offer this in some form or another. That way you can look at them and say, hey, look, this product's got a, looks like a 5% premium load, but it only lasts 10 years. That's good. A lot of companies will do it for every year you pay the premium. Cost of insurance, well, that looks like it's in line. Additional charges, not too bad. And then you can actually see and kind of compare expenses between products and see which one really behind the scenes is more expensive. And then you can really explain it to your client if they're very technical or you're in competition. Look, here's what you put in. Here's what they take out. Here's what they credit. That's your account value. Difference between the account value and your net surrender value is a surrender charge. Okay, very simple. Take all of the mystery out of it. All right, like I said, quickly over that because I don't think that you'll discuss it with most of your clients. Loan provisions, however, you will, and they're very important. So I'm looking at what I'm calling the risk-reward spectrum for different types of loans. On the low end, you have fixed loans, okay? They're typically very low risk, and I'll discuss why. On the higher end of that spectrum, you have variable loans. Typically have a higher potential return for your client and also higher risk, as you would expect. However, here's how one carrier chooses to describe index loans in their illustration, and I think that most carriers should explain this. If you read this, it tells you basically that index loans can make your product look way better, or it could possibly be way worse. However, what does everybody illustrate? Way better. So what they're saying is the risk of your policy lapsing with an index loan is much greater than it would be with a fixed loan. It's a greater risk. It makes sense for some clients, but in retirement type sales, I really don't think it makes sense because you want to minimize risk in retirement. What is the NAIC going to do about this with their upcoming regulations? Well, this one's coming in March 2016. Basically, they're addressing the rampant variable loan arbitrage that's going on. Arbitrage meaning somebody is showing an interest rate being charged on the loans that is lower than what is being credited. So they're earning money even on money they've loaned out of the contract, okay? Right now, it can be pretty much anything the carrier wants to show, up to several percentages. But what they're going to do is say that you can only illustrate a maximum of 1% greater than the variable loan rate for everything that's loaned out. So that's going to minimize the amount of arbitrage going on. And what it's going to do is it's going to make variable loans look not quite as fantastic as they do right now. Probably a really good thing for the client overall. So let's look at the features of fixed loans. These are what you will often hear called wash loans. And why is that? Well, because usually after the first 10 years, the company guarantees you that they will credit to loans the same amount that they charge. They have to charge something because otherwise it would be considered a gift, all right? So they have to charge a percentage. Usually it's around 3% they'll charge you for loaning money, but then they'll put your money in the fixed account and they'll credit you that same rate. So they charge you 3, they credit you 3. It's a net zero cost loan. It's a wash, okay? This is a very safe type of loan, but you need to be careful because a lot of companies don't guarantee that it's a wash, okay? So there'll be a paragraph in the illustration that describes this, and you want to look for one that guarantees you that you will get a wash. Some of them currently pay a wash, but who knows what they'll do because they give themselves the ability to change it. Okay, so how do the variable loans work? You can also hear these called indexed loans sometimes, and why they do that is because they're trying to show the fact that the money that's loaned out is still participating in the indexed account. Okay, so they give you a variable interest rate on the loan. This is normally tied to something like Moody's Corporate Bond Average or Prime +1. Basically, the company's trying to approximate their cost of capital over time. So they charge that variable rate, but they also keep your money in the indexed account. So say that the variable interest rate was 5% in 1 year and the S&P did 7. Well, you earned 2% on all the money that was loaned out. That's great. So it can be very useful for some clients, people that are a little bit more aggressive, but probably not for people once they're in retirement drawing funds out of this contract. You probably want to minimize that risk because it could go the other way, right? Variable interest rate could be 7, and the credited rate might be 0 because S&P had a negative year. Well, that would totally change the picture for your client. Okay. So, yeah, loan arbitrage, we talked about that. Another feature is that often is not discussed is, do companies let you switch between loan types? Well, most companies do, yes. But the question is, how often do they allow you to do it, and do they require you to pay off the loan? So say somebody was taking variable loans earlier on in their life and they were paying them back or whatever, but they had some variable loans and they decided to retire and they wanted to go to fixed loans. Does the company require them to pay off the entire amount, or they just transfer that to the fixed account? Some companies will do it that way, some companies will not. How often do they let you switch between loan types? A good company will let you switch as often as every month and then not require a loan payoff. They'll just transfer all the money into the fixed account or into the variable account. A lot of flexibility with these contracts. All right, I want to talk quickly about some bonus features like I discussed. What are some bonus features that index products have that you should be aware of? Here's one that is often overlooked, and this can be good and bad. Some companies, a lot of index companies, honestly, have persistency credits and bonuses. Basically, this rewards policy owners that keep the policy for a long period of time, usually over 15 years. And what it does is a persistency credit usually returns a portion of expense charges, credits them into your cash value. A bonus typically increases your credited rate. This one's common, so it'll say something like you'll have a 50 basis point bonus for every year after year 15. So what that in effect does is, say you're illustrating 6% on your index, in years 15 plus, it's actually illustrating 6.5. So you need to be aware that that's going on. And this would be something that's easy to miss: guaranteed versus non-guaranteed. I like guaranteed persistency credits and bonuses. It's great for the client that keeps the policy. I really hate non-guaranteed persistency credits and bonuses because I think it's just a way, honestly, of making your product look better without committing to it. And you're making it look better way in the future, and you can't predict what's going to happen. So I think that's a little bit tricky. Here's an example of what it looks like, a non-guaranteed one you need to be aware of. So here's the index credit bonus. It's basically saying that they're going to pay 1% of the index credits after the year 11 of the contract. Well, it says non-guaranteed. They don't have to pay it. It's totally up to the company. So that way out in the future, that's kind of tricky, and you need to be aware of that. And it'll make products with this look a lot better, okay? So you need to be careful about that. So really, if you're illustrating 6 with this product, in years 11 plus, it'd be showing 7, and it would be not guaranteed. So you really, if you're using these, you ought to use a company that guarantees it, which a lot of them do. All right, overloan protection. This is not discussed very often, but it's incredibly important to your client. If you're doing especially a retirement supplement type of deal where you're trying to take tax-free income from a policy when a client retires, well, what happens when things don't go exactly like you planned? What happens if the client takes out more than expected, more than planned, or the policy doesn't perform exactly like you illustrated, which is going to happen? It might be better, it might be worse. Well, the client can get themselves into a situation where this policy hasn't been managed and they're in danger of lapse due to over-indebtedness. We see a lot of policies like this, not index policies because they're relatively new, 10 years or so for most of them. But we do see it with universal life contracts that were sold with too high of an interest rate. Clients end up in a situation where if you've taken a bunch of money out, say you've taken out more than what you paid in, which hopefully you'd be able to, you take out more than you paid in, and the policy lapses, what happens? Well, they get a nice tax bill for that difference. So a client might have paid $500,000 in, might have taken $600,000, $700,000 out. Well, he's going to get a tax bill, immediate income tax bill, when that policy lapses for that $200,000 difference. It's going to be a huge problem. So what this rider does is it says that's a problem. We don't want clients to have to worry about that. We know that it's going to be an issue in the future with people not managing these policies. So what they're going to do is they're going to automatically reduce your face amount and say, policy's paid up, you can't take any more loans, and it's not going to lapse. So you're not going to have any taxes. Okay? My point in all this is it's important rider. You want to make sure the product you're selling has it and it's included. Okay. Chronic illness LTC riders. I get a lot of questions about these on index products, and so I wanted to address it really quick. My theory on this, you're familiar with them. They pay an accelerated benefit for LTC needs from the death benefit. My problem with adding these chronic illness riders, if they cost extra money, my problem with adding them is that that's not really the purpose of what you were doing. Say you're building up cash value in a retirement supplement type of sale. You're really going to end up having paid the death benefit. You've minimized that whole time. So you really have paid a lot for that death benefit because really your goal was to build cash. Well, then you're going to hit this chronic illness rider and start taking down your death benefit. What happens to your cash? Well, your cash is reduced proportionately. So it gets destroyed if you start taking this for a chronic illness need, a long-term care need. So my point is, I think we should keep those separate. I think you should have an index for cash value accumulation, and then if you want a long-term care rider on life insurance, put it on a traditional guaranteed UL, and keep those needs separate so your client doesn't overpay for certain things. And I think everybody likes to bundle stuff, but I think that too much bundling is not in the client's interest here. So I mentioned free versus extra charge because some of the riders are automatically included. Fine, that's a bonus feature, and it's great. Talk to your client about it. But if it's one of the ones you have to pay extra for, normally about 15%, I would not add it to this type of product. Waiver of surrender charges rider. This is the final bonus feature I wanted to discuss. Basically, this waives all surrender charges, like it says. The surrender value would equal your account value from day one. This is not for everybody because typically this is going to somewhat reduce long-term cash performance. So it's not like you should say, well, that sounds like a good idea. I should just put it on every policy. Well, maybe not for your long-term strategies because the client would be better off without it. However, it makes a lot of sense for business owners, somebody who has money kind of sitting on the sidelines, the smart money concept, for business owners because they can put the money into the contract and then immediately their surrender value is what they've put in to the contract, basically, if you have a good one, and they can carry that on their balance sheet. So it's great. It looks great for them. It makes it an easy sale for a business owner. Also, the smart money concept where somebody's got money sitting on the sidelines, maybe in a CD or money market account, they can put money into this IUL contract, waive the surrender charges, and then they can say, well, I can get to my money if I need it, and I'm possibly earning a much higher return. So it looks great. That was where you would use this rider. Not every company has it, but a lot of them do. Good bonus feature. All right, finally, cap histories. Basically, what I would recommend is, and this is probably something you're not going to look into yourself. In fact, all these things, you can just ask us. Give us a call. Ask us about those because we're looking at these products every day. Carriers are only too eager to tell us everything about their products, and it's our job to understand it. So call us and ask us these questions, and behind the scenes, we're keeping track of these things for you. Does a carrier have a history of stable caps? Well, we can look at what their in-force block of business is doing. Have they lowered the caps on their in-force block? That'd be bad for clients, and you wouldn't want to be with that company probably. Thankfully, most of our companies have kept their cap rates really good. And a lot of our companies have actually raised caps over time, and that really looks good for clients because they're committed to those products. And they're not really just offering, like I said, your introductory rates to buy their business and then lowering the cap. Okay, we want to make sure that's not happening. Okay, so all of this information I gave you, I know it was a lot, and it's probably pretty boring stuff overall, but it'll help you win the illustration game. It'll help you when you get into a situation where one agent is showing whatever percentage rate, and they're showing these different loans and all these different, they're switching the death benefit from option 2 to option 1, and there's a million little things you can do. You would not believe how many things you can do to change how an illustration looks. I know because I run illustrations all the time, and I've been doing it for a very long time. We can get into a situation where so many things are going on that it hardly makes any sense, and there's no way the client understands what's going on. So I think these illustration games are really kind of ridiculous, and I think that if you understand these features that I have explained here, you're not even going to get into this illustration game because your client might show you something that another agent showed them, and you're going to say, okay, well, let me take a look at this with you. Well, look at this illustrated rate. Did the agent explain to you why he's showing this really high interest rate? Did he justify that to you? Look at this loan provision. Well, it looks like the agent's showing you a very high loan arbitrage. Do you think that's likely to happen? There's a lot of areas where you can start to explain to your client why you are the expert, and they should just stick with you because you understand what's going on. And this is real. I get into calls with agents. I get on conference calls with clients, and they get showed all kinds of things you would not believe. And you can become the expert. At that point, you got their trust. So you can explain the illustrated rate to them. You can explain the loan provisions. You can explain the bonus features. That's what I want you to be able to do. Why? Because I think once you can do that, you'll become comfortable, you'll be confident that you know what you're talking about, and you'll be competent because you really will know what you're talking about. And that's going to lead to becoming the trusted advisor, and that's really what it's all about. Okay? Winning the illustration game, I guarantee you I can win the illustration game anytime. You send me an illustration, I'll win it because there's so many little things you can change, but that's not what it's about. It's about becoming the trusted advisor for your client. What's Milner's approach here, just in a recap of everything? 1, use a strong carrier with a good history. 2, I would set and manage reasonable expectations with your client. Don't show them some ridiculous interest rate with a variable loan arbitrage. Choose a conservative interest rate. Justify that rate. Choose a loan provision that fits your client. And then be wary, like I mentioned, of non-guaranteed persistency features. Our approach here is really the golden rule, Matthew 7:12, which is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. What I like to think about when I'm running these illustrations is, would this scenario be something I'd show my brother if it was his retirement money that we're planning, or my friend? Would I show it to him this way? I think that once you get into that point, you've really become a real asset to your client. All right. That is really everything that I wanted to cover today. At this point, we'd be happy to answer any questions. I think Michael will read them to me if we have any questions. Like I mentioned at the beginning, there's a chat bar that you can enter questions into, should be on your screen, and we'll get to those and answer them if there's any of them. I'd like to thank you all for being on this call. And like I mentioned, we're here to help. Give me a call, give Andrew a call. We'll help you out with these products. Michael, do we have any questions this time?
No questions yet. I know we've gone a few minutes over. If you've got questions, we'd love to answer them. Please go ahead and send them in either in the question tab or the chat bar. Either place, we will be able to see them. All right, still nothing coming in. I know we've gone a few minutes over. We promised you we'd be out by 10:30, so we apologize for running a little long. I know this was good information, and we're glad to get it out there. Our hope in all of this is that as you interact with your clients around this topic, that you're going to be better prepared to help them in the long run. So we appreciate you joining us. Now we've got a few questions coming in. Let's see. Do you need a securities license, Jake, to do this?
No, you do not. And that goes into what I was explaining really about how similar Index UL is to a current assumption product. It very much is a fixed product. Your client is not buying any securities in the market like they would with a VUL contract. They're simply tracking the performance of an index. So no, you are not required to have a securities license.
And when it comes to an application being received by the carrier, do they generate their own illustration to be signed by the client, or is that something we do for the agent?
Absolutely, we do that.
Okay.
We want you to call us, and if you're comfortable, please have us be a part of the sale with your client. Tell us what your client's looking for. You know, like I mentioned, I can even be on a conference call with your client and find out what their needs are, and we'll design something that fits them. Let us put the illustration together. Let us find the best company for you, and let us discuss the features with you. That's what we're here for.
Okay. And obviously every situation is different, but what companies do we find in the IUL market that we're using and recommending most frequently?
In my opinion right now, the #1 carrier with all of these features that I have discussed that has a couple of different products that work for different scenarios is North American. We have a lot of companies that are close to each other, but I think that North American is usually the best. Underwriting's tough, products are great.
Okay. Well, that's all the questions we've got, Jake. We thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to hopefully being able to help you help your